15 minutes is very short to be able to share with you what we've been working with the past 4 years at HIAP. So I've been running a project called Frontiers in Retreat, a 5-year experimental residency network spanning 7 countries in Europe. And this is a very pompous title for this talk. I don't think I can address or make a very kind of strong case here today. It's only kind of, we are soon approaching the end of our project, and this starts to be the moment where we should critically reflect what has been going on. And I think some of the issues I'm going to tap into might somehow be quite nicely aligned with Antti's ideas. Thank you for the wonderful talk. And let's see, I'm not a morning person either, but it starts to be the time of the day when I'm sort of capable of functioning. So let's see. As the Frontiers project has been quite diverse, and there's lots of material gathered from the past 4 or so years, I would advise you to maybe have a look later at our project archive. We also have a publication online, the first kind of like introductory booklet, and there's a larger, more ambitious publication coming up next April. So plenty of material. I'll try to give you a brief idea, and maybe it's good to mention also a little bit about my role. So I've been working at HIAP as a curator since 2012. And this has been something, the Frontiers project has been something that we've started to develop right after I started to work with HIAP. There was a team of people. I worked very closely with curator, then head of program at HIAP, Taru Elving. And the kind of like underlying motivation to start this endeavor was to I mean, we were quite confused. Back then, it wasn't so, there wasn't so much like ecologically oriented art that we found somehow interesting or meaningful. And we were thinking this must, you know, this cannot be the case. Like there must be artists around who are addressing these fears. And so we decided to, we're kind of lucky enough to still have the EU culture program going on, like the, not the Creative Europe, but the 2007-2013 program with a little bit different emphasis than the current one. So we made a very ambitious application with a group of people at HIAP, and we were successful in kind of securing this funding for a 5-year collaborative project. So let's see. So Frontiers in Retreat, it's a network. We have 8 partners. 7 of them are residency centers. You could say they're you know, they're not located in like European metropolis. They're more like you could say peripheral, but we also wanted to question that kind of thinking, or thinking that our centers would be somehow remote. The underlying motivation was to actually see how we could maybe shift notions of site-specific way of working, and kind of like think about sites or ecosystems or ecological context in a little bit more complex way, because we were thinking that this is something that needed to be tackled. So as I mentioned, the partners are mainly residency centers, and together in 2014, when we probably got the project started, we invited 23 artists to participate and conduct research at all these sites, circulate between the nodes of this network, and mainly focus on research, but we were kind of open for more production-oriented work as well. So, and along the years, a couple more artists came on board. Then there is a sort of a, I don't know whether it's a sub-project or whether it's a meta-project or meta-level to the project. It's called Zoetics. And the idea was that, I mean, residency centers, we rarely get to devote a lot of time for a critical reflection. I mean, we work with a bunch of artists on a very kind of everyday basis. We live with the artists, and we're very much kind of like involved in their everyday grind. So so we needed some instance to actually kind of keep on reflecting what's going on. And Zoetics, it's run by a wonderful artist couple, Nomeda and Gediminas Urbonas, who are based at Art, Culture and Technology program at MIT in the US. And there have been different ways of working together with them. And actually the project is going to conclude next spring with a symposium organized by Zoetics at MIT. But more about that later. The whole thing has become quite rhizomatic, so it seems to be branching out. There's constantly kind of new collaborations and new associate partners coming along, and that's exactly what we were hoping for. So so that this could be the kind of starting point, like mapping out practices, language around ecology, and then kind of maybe considering artist mobility and ecological sustainability with a longer term focus and a little bit more ambitious focus. I would actually like to reach my notes. I wonder if it's possible to change this. I'm not familiar with this computer, so does anybody know how to switch into presenter mode? So yeah, maybe to go back to the starting point. So the key question was like how artists are responding to this growing sense of ecological urgency, and I mean, and somehow we kind of recognize that it's quite complex, this idea of ecology, somehow that there are no shared understandings. And when we started in 2014, like with gathering all these 8 partners and the 25 artists together, we quite soon realized that we need to kind of we need to address or kind of come up with a more complex understanding of environmental art, ecologically oriented art, ecology. So here are a few keywords that have emerged, or sort of a timeline of thought when it comes to frontiers. And something that connects with what Antti has been talking about. So we had to quite soon get rid of the idea that ecological questions would be environmental questions. So one very important kind of underlying idea or constant has been that the understanding maybe relating to, for instance, Felix Guattari's idea of 3 ecologies, that we have to, when we are talking about ecology, we need to consider intertwined aspects of the political, the social. We have to have an intersectional approach, and we actually have to get rid of concepts like nature. So very many of the project participants are kind of like post-nature thinkers. So really trying to actually go beyond the binary, and that's something that has been like one of the key revelations. That, I mean, we first maybe started the project with the idea that, okay, let's map out these artistic practices. Let's see what artists are doing, and let's give them a brief. And of course, what happens? They start working against this brief very productively. So as you can imagine, there's 25 different artists, 25 different approaches. And we thinking that we have this amazing residency network spanning outstanding and very particular ecological contexts, you know, from fjords to mountaintop villages and, you know, the Suomenlinna Island, our location. We were somehow thinking that, okay, let's see how, like, local implications of, like, global ecological processes could be researched through different artistic methodologies. But what actually happened is that it became more of a philosophical project, more about language, more about trying to actually really tackle the nature-culture divide. And as you probably are familiar, in recent years, there have been like emergent, like a much more complex notions of the site. Like it's very difficult to consider even our residency network somehow without considering all the different aspects, all the global power dynamics that that actually form them. Here are a few examples. So let's see, this is a bit Frankenstein, as I said, so there have been a lot of things going on. Maybe this is good to share with you. So it's kind of a timeline of thought, like what has happened, and a few key thinkers that have been influential, both in the project curators and artist thinking. And maybe this is something that, I mean, I could conclude with. So, so currently, like, I think the artists who we have been working with, so they've kind of challenged our initially very naive conceptions of a residency center, kind of a environmental art, the site. So. So instead, they have started to really disrupt the language that we initially used around this subject, and kind of make us more aware that we really lack the tools for building this kind of a new paradigm, like a post-fossil mentality, language, skills, and how we could actually, instead of just focusing on like a site or environment or even like more ecosystemic understandings, how could we really find artistic ways of looking deeply into these particular co-evolutionary processes, like the material basis and relational basis that our everyday existence is like consists of. And there were all sorts of onto-epistemological trouble along the way. And here are some kind of methodologies that have been embraced. So more kind of speculative or fictional approaches. I had a few case examples, but unfortunately I can't go into details with them. But I would like to mention, maybe it's best to just kind of introduce you to a couple of artists who are extremely interested in when considering these questions. So last year, Frontiers co-produced a Museum of Non-Humanity, a project, collaborative project by Terike Haapoja and Laura Gustafsson, and that was a sort of itinerant museum presenting the history of the distinction between humans and other animals, and the way that this imaginary boundary has been used to oppress human and non-human beings alike. So this is a good example, a very linguistic one, of a kind of a binary dissolving project within Frontiers. This was a very kind of in that sense, successful one that it's currently touring. This one, the second version after the first version at Suvilahti in Helsinki. This is in Momentum, Norway. And here are like their sort of artistic approach and strategies. A little bit more critique of dualist thinking. And this one is especially interesting example, and I think I have to conclude with this. But Serbian artist Mirko Nikolic has had this ongoing research-led project called Lives of Metals, and it's a part of a PhD, Minoritarian Ecologies, Performance Before a More Than Human World. And it started at HIAP 2015 by Mirko looking into how dependent and how intimately interwoven our human or so-called human lives are with copper, and how copper circulates both in the loops of extraction industry, but also, for instance, in online situations. So this is his virtual or online copper mine that actually gathers or mines everything related to copper from across the world to this sort of a visual poetry. This is an installation view from our exhibition, also 2015 at HIAP Gallery Augusta. And I wish we could go into these, but I'm afraid we don't have the time. So Mirko is actually currently working in Mustarinda together with the local school, somehow like having a very practical approach to finding more kind of a sustainable, more egalitarian ways of infusing mineral and human lives. And Mirko's work is actually the kind that is like post-humanist in essence. So it actually blurs the boundaries and kind of really questions the whole notion or universalistic conception of the human. So it's a really good example of a very binary dissolving process. And there are a few more, but I'm afraid we have to stop now. I'm sorry about the technological discrepancies, but a brief overview.